This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed! Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Benefits Buzz. I'm your host, Eric Pila. I'm joined by my co-host, Hayden Goethe. Hayden, how you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. We were just talking before. I've got a lot of pep in my step today. I don't know why. It just snowed 3 inches, and it's the end of March as we record this. I had a lot of spring fever, and I should be depressed, but I'm excited about today's topic. That's probably why.
I think you're overcompensating for the weather we're dealing with.
I really am. It's what I do. Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this week's episode. And of course, everyone, thank you for being a faithful listener. If you love this podcast, we would graciously ask you to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Apple iTunes, whatever they're calling it these days. I can't keep up. I'm too old. But if you love this podcast, we love a great review from you. It's the best way for more HR pros like yourself to discover this podcast. With that, I want to jump in. This is a really powerful topic that I'm super excited to talk about, Hayden. I know that, I don't know if we're at the point where we're tired of hearing about the pandemic or we're tired of hearing about how, life has changed. But the reality is it's impacted so many people. And it really has changed, I think, the way that we view life, the way that we view our workplace, the way that we view interacting with others. And interesting enough, you always do such a good job, Hayden, of pulling some information when it comes and data digging, with our episodes. And you found some interesting stats that I want to use to kind of kick off the show, because I think it sets the stage before I introduce our guest. And some of the data you found is from February 2020 to January 2022, male workers were able to regain all the jobs they had lost due to the public health crisis, according to one analysis. However, 1.1 million women left the labor force during that span, accounting for 63% of all jobs lost. And so I think saying that this pandemic disproportionately affected the pandemic differently for men and women, I think is an understatement.
Yeah. And
on top of that, I know you pulled some more great stats here. 42% of women and 35% of men have felt burnt out in the last few months, and that's up 32% and 28% respectively. So I think what we want to talk about in this episode is like, what's going on? Why is this? Why are these challenges affecting women differently? And I think the most important thing needs to be, how do we as coworkers, how do we as friends, how do we as HR professionals who are taking care of our employees support women during this time? And to talk about this topic, I'm so excited to introduce our guest. Her name is Elayne Fluker. She's the author of Get Over, I Got It. She's the host of the Support is Sexy podcast and curator of Safe Spaces for Women. Elayne, welcome to Benefits Buzz podcast.
Eric and Hayden, I'm so excited to be here with you both. Thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite topics.
Yes, we are ecstatic to have you. It's such a powerful topic. And I just want to jump in by, I kind of talked through when I introduced you your amazing accolades, Elayne, and I'd love for our guests and our listeners to learn more about you. I'd love to hear about kind of your journey and what it is you do as a podcast host and as a curator of Safe Spaces for Women. What does that mean?
Thank you so much. I began my career in media, and I've worked in media for over 20 something years at places like Martha Stewart and iVillage.com, which is now TodayShow.com. Essence Magazine is where I started my career, and which was a magazine, or is still a magazine for women, especially Black women. So I've had a great career in media and been on the quote unquote corporate side, even though I think media is a different animal than most corporate spaces. But then I moved in, 2012, my business as an entrepreneur. So having my own sort of media platform, a video platform at the time for women called Chic Rebellion, and then moving into doing more consulting and having more conversations with women about how we work, how we move in the world, what our stories were. And this sort of all led me down the path to creating a podcast, still in the media space, but my own thing, if you will. And the podcast is called Support is Sexy, as you mentioned. We have over 1 million downloads at this point, and I've interviewed over 500 women all around the world. The focus is women entrepreneurs. And the idea for Support is Sexy, or that term, came from this experience I had at a workshop called Momentum in 2015 or so. And it's a personal development workshop. It's based in New York and they have one in LA and these different places. But in that workshop, I really got to see how much I had a problem asking for and accepting support. And it was really shown to me by me seeing it in other people like, wow, they're really struggling to ask for support. And I'm like, do I do that? I think I do that, so it really came to me in that workshop. And then afterwards, I started using this phrase, support is sexy, support is sexy. So not sexual, but sexy as in, think of the sexy vacation you just did or a sexy condo you love to be living in right now or sexy place by the beach. I always think about. So I wanted to think of support as sexy and sort of reframe it for myself. But I noticed when I started saying it to other women, they would sort of light up like, oh, yeah, I like that. Support is sexy. I'm going to start saying that. So that's where the concept came from. And then podcasts at the time, well, podcasts were already popular, not as popular as they are now. This was, 2015 or so. And I was like, maybe I should start a podcast. And a friend of mine said, you should call it Support is Sexy. So I started it there and really focused on, as I mentioned, women entrepreneurs, because that's the space I was in at the time and where I needed the most support. As a journalist, asking questions is one of my favorite things to do. And then it just continued to grow from there. And not only grow as far as the podcast and numbers, if you will, on that, but being able to hear the similarities in stories from women who successful by, all means, whether it's the revenue of their business being hundreds of millions of dollars or their profile and those kind of things. Every one of them talked about how they struggled to ask for support. Still, even when you know better. And because of which I'm sure we'll get into, there are reasons I like to acknowledge, not as excuses, but just you think of imposter syndrome and women are still paid less here in the US for the same positions. And so, there are things there that I like to acknowledge, not use as an excuse, but there are reasons we might feel there's a different calculus, if you will, of why we might not want to ask for support. So from that led to, having these conversations, seeing the pattern, and then writing the book that you mentioned, Get Over I Got It, which I call I Got It Syndrome. Because whenever someone asks us if we need some support, our first response might be, I got it. It's okay. I got it, for the same reasons. So that's just about me, what I'm passionate about, and really curating safe spaces for high achieving women and creating spaces for us to learn how to make what I call empowered asks for support. So that's sort of where I am now and what I'm really passionate about. So I'm excited to share that with you all here, especially as I start to do more speaking in corporations and to HR professionals about how do we do this for a team.
Well, we're excited to have you too, because I mean, as we prep to do these podcast episodes, every now and then when you have a topic, like you just kind of stumble upon like the perfect person to talk about it. Like when I listened to a couple of your episodes, Elayne, for your podcast and preparing for our own podcast, I was like, she's perfect, and the prep call was great too.
Thank you.
As thinking about those stats at the top of the episode that Eric kind of walked through, what do you think is going on? I mean, obviously we're seeing, since the pandemic, we've seen employee burnout be a huge issue, but again, we're seeing it disproportionately affecting, more women than men. What is your take on the reason or reasons behind that?
I can give you gave great statistics and background information from a numbers perspective, but speaking anecdotally from my friends who are, I'm the only crazy entrepreneur in our group. So everyone else works in corporate spaces and has children and families. And their experiences have been that even if married or with a partner, most of the onus during the pandemic we're talking about fell on them to figure out this homeschooling things. So maybe they were managing things with the children anyway when the kids were getting ready for school and going to school. And not that their partners or husbands didn't do anything, but, just sort of moms usually tend to be, or the more feminine energies tend to be the more nurturing. But once the kids aren't going anywhere and everything's in the house and you're not going out to work and everything's in the house, there's no lines of separation there for you. And you just become the person that feels like, whether true or not, you're doing all the things all the time, all in the same space. I mean, I think a lot of us have realized, I certainly have, how much we need to change spaces or environments every once in a while. Otherwise we start to go nuts. So just speaking to my friends, that's been the thing that's really made them feel exhausted and like they never have a break. This idea that everything seemed like, again, whether true or not, it fell on them during that time. And then for a lot of people, it hasn't changed much, because some people aren't going back into the offices, or even if the kids are in school, somebody sneezes and everybody has to come home again. So it's not quite, quote unquote, back to normal. And then for others during that time, as you mentioned, they may have had to leave their, positions in corporate, whether it was because they realized they didn't like that job anymore, or it was just too much to try to keep your kids, focused and educated and on top of things during that time. So I think those are some of the reasons that I know, personal experience. And then, of course, being a data nerd. Not saying you're data nerds. I'm a data nerd.
It's okay if you are. He embraces it.
I was looking at Hayden. I'm like, when we talked, I feel like you were a data nerd because we were both like, did you see this study? And what about this one? And what about this one? So I don't want to project that on you both, but no, that is just, it's good to hear from me. I also, love stories and hearing the experiences of women I know and don't know. And that's what I've heard a lot of. There's just feels like there's no separation.
Yeah. I'm so glad we're elevating this in this episode too. And candidly, real talk. I mean, I literally had to have a crucial conversation with my own wife and her feeling the same things. And what do I need to do better to support those things? Because naturally, I don't know, it just feels like, like, am I doing my part, or is she doing too much? How do we work collaboratively? And we're lucky to have two adults with kids that we're both contributing, but that's not always the case in every scenario. So there's a lot of different factors. And I have a question, and we kind of got to a point where sometimes it feels like it's not. The pandemic has changed everything, and I absolutely know that. But sometimes it's almost like, are we using the pandemic as a scapegoat? And so I would love for you to know, did this issue already exist? Did the pandemic, bring it, elevate it? Did it compound how prolific it was, or is this something that's relatively new in the last 2 years? I'd love your just take, since it sounds like in your intro you've been thinking about this for a number of years as part of your career path. So I'd love to kind of hear, where was it before and how has it been potentially exacerbated with this pandemic?
That's a great question. I mean, I could talk philosophically about that forever. So pull me back down if I start to get too woo-woo about it. I'm just like, this had to happen for a reason. I just feel like the pandemic revealed, it's just 2020 revealed so much overall. And I just think it's just a time of great change for us, and change is hard, as a world and a society, but stay focused. Okay. I do think that, I think it really illuminated, speaking as a woman, and again, speaking from the women that I've spoken to, I think it illuminated how much we feel, again, whether this is reasonable or not, that we have to do so much or overcompensate or do twice as much to be considered as good, and those kind of things that we might have been doing already in the workforce. So as I mentioned, this hesitancy to ask for support because you thinking, well, are they going to think I don't know what I'm doing? And now it's like, if I don't get on that call, the 17th Zoom call of the day, are they going to think I'm not on top of it? Or, I think the things have changed, or some things have switched places as far as what the concerns might be. But I believe, again, now that a lot of it feels nonstop, even if you get because you get off quote unquote off work at 6, but you're still in the same space. You don't feel like you leave, even if you're not taking calls anymore and that kind of thing. So I think to answer your question more specifically, I think it elevated a lot of the issues that were already there, that existed, that we all knew about. I mean, I think, again, I think that's true with a lot of things, like the incident with, or not incident, murder of George Floyd in 2020. These kinds of things around the world were happening a lot, but there was nothing else to distract us, right? We weren't going out of the house at the time. We weren't looking. So all these things, I believe they have happened and just really allowed us to see, to allow the light to be shown on some of these things that were already existing, or already issues, or already things we should address. But we did so without distractions. Even the environment. You look at, during that time, it was like the smog cleared for the first time in LA and like India, or it just was like, wait, so all we have to do is stop driving? Oh, okay. But no one's going to do that. Like, it just was like, we never would have collectively been like, send out a memo to the world. We're all just going to stop driving for a little while. It will change the environment. I mean, those kind of things to me were just astounding. So I think the same is true with women at work. It just, shone a light on things that probably were already there, but we were all, like everything, keeping it going. And once it all fell apart, it's like, oh, this is broken. We need to fix this. And I believe we can fix this.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do feel like, there were some things, like, for example, like even before the pandemic, for those of us who were working in offices, right? Like, you still had times where it was hard to like disconnect from work. But like, to your point, like Elayne, like that just got amplified when we were actually like physically working at home.
Right.
And, like trying to separate from that after that.
Right.
Is really
like you thought it was hard before until you weren't able to leave your home. Your home became your office. Then it becomes a whole other thing. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Just thinking about like, we hear so much right now about like the great resignation, like employee retention is a huge topic, employee support's a
Hmm.
huge topic, and like mental health. Those two topics are getting so much attention. What should our audience, largely HR professionals, like what should they be thinking about in terms of how to better support employees and really better support women, based on some of the things you've kind of outlined already?
I think one of the simplest things employers or HR professionals can do is ask. I think a lot of times we're guessing, like you and I, we are all having a conversation here, which I think is so important. But I think a lot of times we don't think, let me just ask and find out what people say they need, whether that's anonymous survey or something like that, or say we're thinking about creating certain kinds of programs. Here's what we're thinking. What do you all think? And it might not be the setting. Well, now most of us aren't in the office, but even if we were, the setting might not be have a meeting, and all hands and bring everybody into the room because, now getting into introverts and extroverts and that kind of thing, the person who might need the most support might not be the person who speaks up, or in my word, the person who's afraid to ask for support might not be the person who speaks up. So I think there are ways now with technology that we can really maximize the ability to be able to get information and really crowdsource from your people, from your teams, what kind of things and patterns, patterns don't lie, right? If you see several people saying we need to be able to know that at 7 o'clock we can shut down and not be penalized, and that might already be true. You might be a professional, like, of course but if I don't know that, or if I don't hear that, or if I'm not given that permission, that might not be something that I feel comfortable doing. Shonda Rhimes, for example, who's executive producer and creator of Grey's Anatomy and all these other Bridgerton and all these other huge shows, that's one of her rules. Shonda Rhimes, and not that she's better than any of us, but she certainly has a lot to do and a lot of people. But she says she has a rule that you better not don't email me, and I will not email you after 7 p.m. And so those kind of things, they might seem very simple, but we might be thinking we have to. I mean, diversity programs are great, or bringing in people to talk are great. I'm someone who comes into organizations to talk and deliver this, but a lot of times when I speak to leaders and ask, well, what kind of things do your people say they need? They don't know because we just haven't asked. So I think that's the first place to start.
Uh, Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, it sounds like based on what you're saying, like that doesn't even change even for those employees and those women who are back in the office now. I mean, it sounds
Right.
like tactics are pretty much the same, whether you're working from home or you're working
Absolutely.
hybrid, right?
Right, because now I think especially having worked at home for, well, all of us for a short time, but now some are home, some are in the office. I think you and I may have talked about this, Hayden. There was a report that showed, again, data nerd, a report that showed just how for women, for example, something that I hadn't thought about, a lot of women aren't going back to the office or choosing not to go back to the office, even if they continue to work. But how does that change the dynamic of office politics? So, for example, if you, Eric, are going into the office with your job, you might be able to or you will be able to interact with people in a different way than the woman who's your coworker who stays at home, or anyone for that matter. But certainly, again, for women, because I might not. It might have been hard already for me to be invited on the golfing trip, or beer with the team and those kind of things. If I'm not in the office, it's an out of sight, out of mind thing. And they're now finding that with women, that's becoming another challenge, or a light is being shown on that, of just, it's another consideration we have to have. So as an HR professional or a leader in an organization, what are the things you can do to really bring your teams together now? If some are at home, some are in the office, some now people are more open to having people outside of their even local area. So some are out of the country. What can we do regularly? If it doesn't have to be every day, every week even, but where's the time that we know we can give everybody the same playing field and everyone's communicating in the same way throughout, periodically throughout their time working together. So that's something else to consider.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the role that we're on, because that's really where I wanted to focus a lot of this time, is like, how do we address these things, and how do we help? And I love that I said help, because one of the things you've done is, right, you talk about, stop having this pride, and it's okay, it's okay to ask for help. And I know you made an acronym out of the word, right?
Yes.
And I love to talk to that. But what are some other things? Let's keep the train going on the ways that we can support women, and whether that's helping them help themselves, and as well as your coworkers helping them too.
I think since we were talking some about leveling the playing field, also giving women and other people, marginalized groups in the organization, opportunities and second chances. That's something that I hear a lot about. People feel like they don't, and again, it might just be a simple out of sight, out of mind thing. I don't believe that everything is about quote unquote discrimination. Sometimes like, oh, I didn't think of Kathy because she lives in Colorado and our office is in California. It might be as simple as that, but still, Kathy is impacted because she doesn't have an opportunity to go after this new position or something that the company is going after or the subjective or that kind of thing. So I think really being conscious of who you're giving opportunities to for, again, whether that's something that the organization has decided to go after or it's a certain position. It's not always about a promotion. Sometimes it's, hey, we're working on this huge project. Kathy would be great for this. Let's reach out to her and see if this is something that she's interested in. And then creating the space where your people know, this is why I talk about curating safe spaces, where anyone on your team knows that uh, messing up or not knowing exactly what to do or needing to ask for support, as we talked about, doesn't constitute failure and doesn't mean you'll never have that opportunity again. I think there's certainly, I'm not, I think I know there's been studies about that too, how men tend to apply for jobs. If you guys are like 60, not you guys, you know what I mean when I say you guys,
Yeah.
60%, 60% qualify, and you're like, I'll figure out the rest. It'll be fine. Whereas I and most women are like, oh my gosh, I have to get all the certificates, all the things, be 150. And again, we talked about there are reasons that we might think that, but still, when we're dealing with, my career trajectory versus yours, I might not go after a position that I may be qualified for because of all these things in my mind, or I might not go after an opportunity because I'm thinking, well, shoot, if I messed up, it's the end for me, or I'll never get that chance again. So I think encouraging, creating an environment of, again, well, the growth mindset, which we've all heard about with Carol Dweck, right? So a learning environment where learning from your mistakes as opposed to quote unquote avoiding mistakes is part of the process. Making sure you have mentors, which we all know about within the organization. And when we say mentors or quote unquote sponsors, I want people to know this doesn't mean it doesn't have to be a huge company. I think sometimes I know for me as an entrepreneur and I'm a solopreneur, but I have a team, virtual team of people. I try to make sure even with them, I have two women that work with me, that I give them opportunities for their own growth and personal development and advancement, whether it's a program that I've seen that has nothing to do with me that I think they might be interested in, or it's something that I'm doing and I want them to have the opportunity to stretch and learn and grow. And I tell them, hey, you should do this. The company, meaning me, will pay for it, or those kind of things. So I think there are ways, again, to create an environment of learning, an environment of appreciating and learning from mistakes, like what worked, what didn't work. I mean, that takes so much power out of I failed at this thing. And then what can we do to support you in getting better, especially if it's someone you want to keep on your team. And I think that's who we're talking about here, right? You're not talking about keeping women or anyone just for the sake of having them. These are people that you want to retain, which I know is a big issue for a lot of companies right now. How can we retain and support, especially high achieving women?
Do you have any tips for even just like, I think we've talked a lot about like some really great tips for like, supervisors and leaders. Do you have any tips for just like coworkers, who maybe we're talking about like people who are on the same level in terms of supporting the women around them at work?
Yes, I think in the same way, as we talked about sponsors or being the person that can, and sponsors, if I'm sure you've talked about this before on your show, but mentors being someone you can go to and usually ask a question or have a conversation about something you want to do and they give you advice. A sponsor is someone who speaks up for you when you're not in the room in the most, common terms. If you're in the room and I'm not in the room, but you think I'd be great for a project, I need you to speak up for me, or I need you to tell someone we should, again, as we said, we should think about Kathy, and not in the room might literally be out of the country because I work in another place now because of the world we're in. So I think that's something that to be much more conscious about, or again, not because they're women, because they're great at what they do. And you want to make sure that women, people of color, all marginalized groups, disabled people, or people with different abilities have this opportunity to grow and learn and contribute to the organizations in the ways that that they can. So I think that's one of the things that's very important is being able to speak up. I call it name propping. So I'm a huge fan of name propping. I might mention my aunt during this conversation, or, it could be someone either professionally or otherwise, not name dropping, because name dropping, you have to know who they are, right? So I call it name propping. And I think that's something in professional settings that we can make sure to do as well and be conscious of. And it's just good karma. Again, I'm a woo-woo person. So it's just good energy to share, talk about other people and what someone did. And what's funny? I actually noticed, you all may have seen it. I don't know if it's Walmart, or I don't know what company. It's a huge company, but I've noticed a couple now have started doing commercials where they're talking about the importance of celebrating people beneath you in the organization, as far as hierarchy or other people on your team. I don't know if you've seen these commercials where they say, someone, Kathy helped, I use Kathy as the name we're going with. Kathy helped me do such and such. And then you see people coming up like, great job, Kathy. That was really, I just see organizations even trying to say, this is what we're about, not even just doing it internally. So I think now is a good time to really focus on those kind of things as people are, becoming more conscious of that and how important that is.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love all these tips. So there's been over a dozen of great. So if everyone's listening and you've been jotting, meticulously frantically taking notes, there's so many good knowledge nuggets in there, Elayne. Thank you for that. I love the term name propping. I think it's a great thing. And just I think celebrating wins. We actually have an upcoming episode talking about recognition and celebrating when people and when they do great things. And I think speaking up for them if they're not present, I think is a big part of that. So thank you for that. We try to do our best on these episodes and give you the right, propose the right questions for you to get some of the answers, but we always tend to miss stuff, Elayne. So as we wrap this episode, is there any final tip or any topic that you want to bring up to kind of finalize this episode?
I think one, I'm sad it's almost over because I could talk to you all forever, but I'm appreciative of you having me. And but I will say, one, thank you so much for this conversation. You don't, maybe you do know, but I will say I just appreciate and want to acknowledge you both for having these conversations and talking about how you can, as you said, either be a better coworker or a leader. And this is what it looks like. This is actually what that kind of support looks like. So I think for all of us to remember not only to support ourselves, but to support each other. And again, asking the questions. I mean, it's exactly what you're doing here. And the space doesn't have to be a podcast. It could be just saying, is there any way I can support you? Is there anything I can do for you? As you mentioned, Eric, with your wife, is there anything I can do for you? What can I do to help you with this right now? Tell me what you need is also a good one, because when people have a problem asking for support, sometimes just saying, let me know if you need anything. Well, I'm not going to let you know because, I don't ask for support, or I think I can do it better myself. So tell me what to do and tell me what you need.
Yes.
Might be, I love saying that to people. Tell me what you need right now. So those are just some things to share overall. Not specific tips, but I just really want to say thank you, for the conversation. And I think it's important that it be one that we just keep having and keep learning from each other, and having the humility to say, even if, we thought we were getting something right. I've been there where I thought I was getting this right. Now this person has told me again, I asked what they need or what's working, what's not working, then learning how can I do something different to be able to support them.
Well, we want to support you too, Elayne. And so I know we've just begun to talk about the tip of the iceberg. You have, 100 episodes, I'm sure. And so I would love for our listeners to, if they want to learn more about supporting women, how can they find your podcast? Where should they go to learn more about the topics and that you're speaking to, Elayne?
Yes, but you can go to elaynefluker.com to see the podcast, more about the book and all those things. But I really love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So if you hear this on the podcast, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Tell me that you heard our conversation. Tell me your thoughts. It's one of the places where I have the most engagement with people, and people share with me the kind of things that we're talking about and what they're going through. And also I have a newsletter there that goes out monthly, which has at the time over 10,000 subscribers, where I talk about women at work and my experiences as a Black woman at work, in corporate, and then as an entrepreneur. So I really just love connecting with people there and seeing what you're up to. So if there's any way I can support you, reach out on LinkedIn and please let me know. And I'm just Elayne Fluker on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. You've given us some big aspirations for our own podcast too, in terms of subscribers and listens.
Yeah.
So congratulations on such a successful.
Thank you. Well, that was over years of time. I always tell people, everybody starts from zero. So yes, thank you.
You bet. You've been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for your time, Elayne. We'll make sure to include all those details in our show notes, so check that out, so you can learn more about Elayne as well. So thanks. Take care. We'll see you.
Thank you.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.